Well, it's 10:30 and time for brainstorming the human connection. This is brought to you by the South Dakota Humanities Council. My name is Lawrence Diggs. I'll be your host today. And today we're going to be talking with Amy Sazue. And Amy is working with the executive director of Remembering the Children. And this is going to be a very interesting program, and one that I think deserves a lot more conversation than it is currently giving. It's currently getting. So with that, Amy, welcome to our program. Can you hear me? Oh, there you go.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good. We want to remind everyone that this is an interactive program. So as we go through our conversation, you're part of this conversation. And I hope you'll jot down any questions or just maybe a couple of cues that'll help you to remember what your question was or is, so that you can join in this conversation. Maybe you have something to contribute to the conversation, your own personal experience or experiences of people that you know. So, Amy, let's start off with talking a little bit about you. Where did you start out, and what's a kind of a thumbnail sketch, elevator speech, as you might say, to where you are and what you're doing now?
Yeah. Well, I'm Sichangu in Oglala, Lakota, and grew up in between the Bay Area. So we lived in the Bay Area until I was about 9, and then on the Rosewood Reservation and then the Pine Ridge Reservation. But I've lived here in Rapid City for about the last 20 years. My mom's from Rosebud, and I maintain my connections to family and homes there. And my dad's from Wombly area and Pine Ridge. And so I'm a proud graduate of the Red Cloud Indian School. And but I've lived here in Rapid City, raised my children here in Rapid City, and own a home here in Rapid City. So after 20 years, I guess I might say I'm from Rapid City at this point, but always hold tight to my roots on the reservations.
How did you come to be involved with this program? What was the connection that got you there?
Yeah. The Remembering the Children Memorial Project really started from this larger, completely volunteer project called the Rapid City Indian Boarding School Lands Project. And my friends and colleagues, Heather Dawn Thompson, Kibby Brown, and Eric Zimmer, kind of uncovered this story of our community of Rapid City that had impacts in several different ways. So there's one issue, and I think this is the primary one that everybody hears about and knows about, is there's a land issue here. So the Rapid City Indian Boarding School sat on about 2,000 acres of land here in Rapid City, and was in operation from 1898 to 1933 as a boarding school. The site then transferred over to turned into a tuberculosis clinic or treatment center because tuberculosis was rampant at the time. And then in the 50s or early 60s, I think, it transitioned into an IHS hospital. So the history of this site in Rapid City is longstanding. And I think one of the reasons it's so important, it's one of the things that Indian people have in Rapid City that is a sign that we're here. It's a place that has been ours in this community that is very visible. It's right in the middle of town. So this story started because there was families that were our community members asking some of our friends, so Kibby, and about graves on the site. And she didn't know what they were talking about, like what kind of graves, and knowing the history of Sioux San, she didn't know if it was boarding school, if it was TB, if it was, what era this was referring to. Well, they were referring to children, and Kibby didn't have any knowledge of that. And so her and our friends started this kind of mini research project about, like, maybe are there really graves here? Like, let's find them. And so they started looking parcel by parcel through the acreage here that belonged to the Rapid City Indian School. For anybody familiar with Rapid City? It stretches from Bacon Park all the way back to Canyon Lake, Canyon Lake or Blessed Sacrament Church here in by Canyon Lake in Rapid City. So it's large, and it's the whole west side of the city. So they looked parcel by parcel and started I eventually identified land or parcels that where there's probable remains, and they visited with the tribal historic preservation officers. They visited with community members. They visited with spiritual leaders who all confirmed that this was a likely site of unmarked graves. In that process, however, they discovered that there were parcels of land that were given by DOI, the Department of Interior, to entities in our community, but were subject to reversion. And so meaning that if they weren't being used for their original intended purpose, that they would revert back to the Department of Interior. So this project, we call it Pandora's Box, because looking for graves, we found graves. We found probable graves, and we found land that we were able to help the 3 tribes get put back into trust or get put into trust. But at the same time found all these land issues, and then found this just history, this heartbreaking history of our community and the way it was shaped. And I always remember at one presentation, Heather Dawn Thompson was presenting, and somebody in the crowd said, "Oh, what are you going to do about it?" And she was like, "Well, who are we? Like, what are you going to do about it? What are we going to do about it?" She's like, "We are nobody. We have no money. We have we're just doing this on our own," just turned into this thing that pulled everybody in. And that was it, Lawrence, was that pull, was wanting to understand, not understanding, but wanting to understand, and then wanting to be part of the solution, wanting to be part of the way that we move forward through this. And so I started volunteering, and we'd meet every week and started going and listening more and learning more about the story. And then I started helping in some of the public presentations. So we've presented, I think we've counted up over 100 times. We've done them in person. We've done them via Zoom. We've done them in our state. We've done them in other states. Talking about this story that we found here, and this history of a community and a place that we all love dearly and that we all call home, and a place that we're all raising children and grandchildren, and we want the best for. We want to be a place where they want to be, where they want to be raised, where we all want to keep our children. And so that project, these amazing people and all of these amazing volunteers I've had the privilege of getting to work with, started writing grants, because we're like, what do we do with this? And obviously we need money. The other thing was we surveyed the community. We said, what would we do? What do we want? And overwhelmingly, they wanted us to protect the graves, protect the children, but then they wanted other things. So community center came out of this idea. Housing for elderly came out of this conversation. And so what started as this big group of people has kind of turned into several different entities. And we have Hey Sapa Otipi, who is working on a community center. And we have the Memorial Project. And I am working with a grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, who gave us money to build the site. And so that's what I'm working on. But it's really been about that pull, about wanting to know more, wanting to understand, and then wanting to be part of solutions moving forward.
Can you talk a little bit more about community involvement in development of the program? How did that come about?
Sure. Well, it really started from people like Heather being like, you should be involved, you should be involved, you should be involved, and inviting literally hundreds of people to these meetings and then to these presentations. To their credit, that core team was really good at being super inclusive. And so we held, so like we said, we had the public meetings. The first meeting was at the Journey Museum and was standing room only. We had to shut the doors because there's too many people. But doing the public presentations, making sure that they were free and that they were accessible to people. We moved them around, did them at the library. We just tried to make sure that we did all the presentations in a place where anybody that wanted to hear could do that, could join us. The other thing was in surveying the community, that was post-COVID, like immediately post-COVID. So nobody is really comfortable with being in person still. So we did drive-through surveys, and then we had QR codes where people could do them online. But it was kind of funny, you know, we'd have the surveys and we'd stand out. We went to like the mall and put up a little tent or a little shade, and then we'd stand under them and just hand them out, and people would pull up, we'd run over to their cars and give them one, then take it back, you know, and just trying to make sure that we included as many people as we could, and anybody who wanted to have a say in what was going to happen moving forward was able to do that. Um, in my current role as the executive director of the Remembering the Children Memorial, one of the things I've done to maintain that idea that we're inclusive is again opening up our meetings to the public, and if people want to join, they can join us and hear how we are working through decision making moving forward. We do try our best to adhere to this consensus-based model of decision making, which for anybody who has has any experience in that is super cumbersome. It's time consuming. Sometimes you're like going around in circles, but I think everybody feels like they have a voice in that process. And so that's been something that we've tried our best to adhere to. And I think not one of us would say we're perfect at it or that we've nailed it every single time. But there's definitely this idea that we leave ourselves open to the public and to anybody who wants to join us. And questions about money, all of that stuff, I'm like, we don't even really own it. We are stewards of it to build this thing. But this thing needs to be based on what our community says is the best way moving forward. And I can't by myself say, I know this is going to heal our community. You know, I know how we're going to do this because I don't know what that looks like. And I don't know what that means for everybody. And so we've just done our best to make sure that people who want to be involved have an opportunity to do that.
I really like the idea of the consensus model. I use that in my work in the prison. And for a lot of people, they go, well, how can you do anything if you don't have a president, a vice president, or treasurer, and you don't even have money? You know, it's like, how do you make that happen? And I was fortunate enough to grow up in a community that that's the way things got done. And it was explained to me because I had a hard time, like, you guys are wasting time. We could just get right to it. It's actually without wasting time. Because it's what you want is everybody has their oar in the water and rowing. And if they're not going to row, at least they take their oar out of the water. You know, they don't screw up everything because they got heard. And you let them kind of explain away, and pretty soon they convince themselves. If you have the whole idea of the good of everybody and you keep coming back, how does that work for everybody though? You know? And the person usually, nobody really wants to say, well, I don't care about any of you. I just care about myself. Because now suddenly people don't care about you. You know, you can't say that out loud. And if you keep asking them, pretty soon their response, if that's what they're feeling, that their response sort of makes that clear. So I found that that's a very good way of, especially if you have like, we want everybody to be involved. This is not a top-down, manipulate everybody to do what me or my posse wants. It's for everybody, and we need everybody's input. We value that. It's amazing how once you get that going, everybody is running. Boy, it really goes. Things now, they become powerful. At first, it's kind of like you're in like low gear for a while. But then once you get going, now the problem is how to steer it.
Yeah. I think part of that process too is that we've seen people come and people go, and people have been part of the project. Sometimes, you know, some of people have, you know, other jobs now, or they're more busy and they're not as involved. And that was something I struggled with, you know. I'm like, no, we have to all stay in here. Everybody has to stay. We got to do this, you know. And but I've seen that flow, that ebb and flow of involvement has made room for other people to join and to be part of it. And I keep thinking, and I've said this to them, just acknowledging it, you know, that the right people come at the right time. And that's a greater power's work too. And that's kind of a tribute to the intention of the project. And so, yeah, there's a lot of times where I have to remove myself from the work, where like it's 1000% not about me. And it's not even about anybody here. It's about children who lost their lives away from family in a horrible situation. And what do we as a community do about that, you know? And but I think part of that is that ebb and flow of involvement. And for a while there, I would take it personally, or I'd be like, no, I want everybody involved. I want everybody to come back and be part of this. And we have to keep this group together. But it's the ebb and flow of involvement has definitely made room for some amazing people to join the team and join the work. And I'm really proud of that too.
Let's talk a little bit about the background of the problem. That is to say, let's move back in history when the work that you are doing now was being created, you know, the reason for you doing the work. Tell us about that.
You know, this issue goes back to federal policies regarding Indigenous people in South Dakota, but not just South Dakota, across the country and across the continent. You know, we can't act like what is happening here is any different than what they're seeing in Canada. And the issues are so complex that the solutions are going to be just as complex. But what we're dealing with is this federal policy regarding the education of Indian children back in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And Richard Henry Pratt, you know, was at Carlisle and had this idea that they could kill the Indian and save the man. They wanted Indian people to conform to society, and this policy particularly was inflicted on the most vulnerable, on children. And so children of all ages, the Rapid City Indian School was 4th grade through 8th grade, although there's variances in that, and we'll probably never know why. There was kids that are definitely younger than that were still at this school, and older than that were still at this school. But the policy was flawed, of course, but it also was it was complicated. You can't remove everything about a person and leave the shell of a person and expect them to become part of a society or feel like they belong in society. And so what we see is that here was that the Rapid City Indian Boarding School got kids from the surrounding area. So they're not all Oceti Sakowin. There's Crow, there's Cheyenne, there's Turtle Mountain Chippewa, there's there's kids from all over. And if you look at Rapid City and you look at a radius, you know, around it, it isn't just Oceti Sakowin, it goes into Wyoming and Montana, and they definitely recruited children from there. This school was a BIE school, and they got money per pupil, which meant that the superintendent was responsible for going and recruiting children and making sure that they got enough money to operate the place. Children here worked half the day and went to school half the day. And according to some documentation or records, you know, there was as much as 50 children to one teacher at a time sometimes. And the children worked on the land. So the school itself sat on such a big part of property because the children worked cattle, and they also did farming here in Rapid City, which is crazy. Another part of this is that records were not kept with great integrity, and so there's gaps in information and in the research. We have as many student records as we could find and physicians' reports as we could find, but there's still gaps in information, and we don't know accurately how many children did die here. We found evidence of about 50 that passed away while attending the school, but the records are scant to describe. Some of them went home, some of them were buried here at Mountain View Cemetery, and we think that some were buried on this hillside behind West Middle School here in Rapid City. And that's the issue that we're dealing with, is that our government did not understand or value the lives of Indigenous children, and so the records weren't kept with any integrity. The superintendents who were charged with running these schools didn't value the connection between these children and family. And really, there was one article that said, it was talking about a child that died, and it said that the parents got here in time for him, and then they were there at his services. But there's a comment in there where it said these parents were sad just like any other parent and grieved their child, which gives us idea that there's a thought that perhaps Indigenous people or Lakota people did not feel feelings, that we wouldn't grieve our children, because why else would it be noted that the parents grieve like any other parent is what it said. That's what it said. And so, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, that's one of the problems with, I think, with the human brain. And that's how we deal with when we eat animals and stuff like that. Anything that we know we're doing harm to that thing, we have to like envision that there's no harm. You know, it's like, because otherwise it challenges our humanity. You know, it's really difficult for us to like live with ourselves. So we impose upon those people or those animals or whatever, our idea that allows us to cope. And so I think right in the face of obvious contradictions, we'll stick to that because it seems to be a coping mechanism, which doesn't really do us very much good. I want to stop here for a moment to ask any of the audience if they so far have questions or comments. This is an interactive program, so there's plenty of space for you. Anybody?
It's such a heavy topic. I think that acknowledging that too is hard. And sometimes there aren't a lot of questions because it takes a lot of time to process. And yeah.
Well, I'm going to make it harder, as if you needed that. I'm going to make it harder because I have a story that I think is relevant to this topic. A few years ago, I was asked to come and do a presentation in Mobridge. And so I checked into this motel because I was going to be there the next day to make this presentation. So I checked into the motel. And in the middle of while sleeping, I had a very strange dream of Native children. And it was like they were having a conversation with me, and they were saying, well, why were we treated so bad? You know, what was it? What did we do? You know, and nobody knows about us. That was kind of the thing that I remember. You know how dreams are, you wake up and a lot of it spills out on the pillow. But I remember waking up with this, and then I couldn't go back to sleep. So, you know, like a good American, I turned on the TV, and on the TV, they were having a story about the kids in Canada. They weren't talking about the US. They did mention that we probably have that and we should be doing the same thing. They mentioned that. But the story was really about the kids that were taken into these boarding schools and many times disappeared, all those graves they were digging up. So that struck me. And what struck me is why doesn't anybody know our story? Why does nobody care about us? And so the result of that is I felt like they were asking me in this dream to raise the alarm. So in order to go back to sleep, I wrote this poem, and it's called Cries of the Children. The cries of the children arise. Years of tears have finally loosened the grave grit and dried spit from their lips. And now their loosened lips cry, why? Why did Jesus, who loves all the children of the world, hate us? Why did Jesus send his anointed to rip us from the arms of our mothers and all we loved and loved us? Why did Jesus allow them to sodomize us to death and dump our frail bodies into unmarked graves in the ground? Why did the all-powerful Jesus, who knows all and sees all, not care enough to save us from his people? Why should we want to go to heaven, where we would meet and live forever with those who tortured and murdered us, and the Jesus who would enable them to make such a hell for us on earth? Why? As I said, I'd make it heavy again. But I thought, that those, they were it's concentrating rather on why the schools were made, but why they existed. But I found it really interesting that many of the schools were religious schools, and you would think that would be the last place that such atrocities would take place. So anyway, that's my poem. Let's talk about what you're trying to do and what are the challenges. What kinds of things are you trying to do as far as getting the community to emotionally come to grips with things maybe that they buried or things that they have to struggle with, both the adults and children. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and I think that those are the issues that we're trying to address in the building of the site. The Remembering the Children Memorial site is going to be mostly landscape architecture, because we want to leave as small of a footprint on the land as possible. But we want to make a place where these children's names will be acknowledged, where they'll be placed, publicly, where you read them out loud, because for the last 100 years or so, they haven't been. They were forgotten, and not by their families, but by this community, by the school. They were forgotten. And so what we want to do is to make a place where Indigenous people, where descendants and ancestors of these children who died and those that went to school there, can come and see them, can visit them, acknowledge them, and honor them. We want to make a place where our non-Native community members, our neighbors, and the people that we live with every single day can come and learn on their own, where they can come read the story, come learn about federal boarding school policy, the local Rapid City Indian School, and its impact on the community 100 years ago, but even today. The distribution of the land that the Rapid City Indian School sat on really shaped Rapid City, particularly the west side of Rapid City and the north side of Rapid City. And so we want to make a place where people can come learn about that. And, Lawrence, you and I had visited a little bit yesterday, and I always think about this in this way. So everybody can come and learn, and whatever their connection or disconnection is to this story in that land, that everybody can reckon with it or deal with it in their own way. And that they don't have to be, on a Zoom or in a class where they have to feel the feelings and then process it in front of everybody. This will be an open public place with interpretive elements and art that help to tell this story. And, we really want to build understanding, and we want to build empathy in this community. And these are two things that I think are missing in a lot of ways in a lot of different topics. But the boarding school issue is one that, if you think about historical trauma, this is really the impetus. And if you think about a way, the ways that people or humans can be traumatized, taking children and taking parents' ability to parent, and a community's ability to raise children is the biggest source of trauma that there is. That's the future. That's your next generation. That is your own, your own blood, your own. And to have that taken from you, we are looking to rebuild that connection for our people, for people who lost children there. And, but it's also kind of an eye opener. I think that not everybody understands that every single Indigenous person they meet is a descendant of a boarding school, so either survivor or somebody who went to a boarding school. And that's hard too. That's something that we can put in the distant past by looking at it as like that was 100 years ago. But when you look at it as humans, you know, that those are my grandparents. All four of my grandparents went to boarding school. Um, and my dad went to a boarding school. And so it's when you humanize it, when you create those human connections, that's where we're hoping to build that understanding and empathy. And maybe it'll help us look at each other at community members that you might not understand in a different way. If you understand a little bit about the why. And so we're building a physical place that will hopefully do a lot of these things through storytelling, through interpretive elements, through art, through history, you know, telling this history through facts. We're lucky to have, I tease him all the time because we have a PhD historian, Dr. Eric Zimmer, worked with us. And I'm like, you don't know you need a PhD historian, you know, until you have one. You're like, it's so cool. He's been an amazing asset, but I value that too. Our team has really worked hard on, we are Indigenous led, and my board of directors is all Indigenous people, but we've worked hard on creating allies too, and leaning on our allies for help when needed. And the people that have worked with us have done a great job of supporting the project and doing what they can, but also acknowledging that this issue, this work needs to be led by Indigenous people. But there is great value in being able to work with our non-native allies and community members and forging trusting relationships with them and being able to work together. And we've role modeled it with this project, and hopefully it's something that we can see grow after the site is open and people can come learn on their own and walk this land and maybe understand a little bit about why things are the way they are in our community.
And you talk about a little bit more about the challenges. In other words, I hear what you're trying to do.
Yep.
Usually the reason it isn't done is because, well, one is just time, but the other thing is they're usually environmental resistances. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So building a memorial site on trust land in the middle of Rapid City has been interesting. I've had to have multiple multi-jurisdictional conversations. And so I wouldn't say they're challenges, but I think they're the things where I've really learned a lot, you know. So I've had to work with the three tribes. So the Oglala Sioux tribe, the Rosebud Sioux tribe, and the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. This land is held in trust for them. And so I've had to work with all three tribal councils, all three tribal presidents, all three tribal historic preservation officers, and all three land committees, which for anybody who's worked with the tribes, working with one and getting stuff through committees and councils hard enough, but working with three has been a challenge, but a good one. I enjoy going back home. I enjoy being connected to my home communities and to my relatives on the reservations. And I'm lucky or happy to say that we have the support of all three tribes, both for performing the environmental assessment on behalf of the three tribes, but also granting us permanent access to build, or the ability to build a permanent facility on trust land. Looking at kind of the other direction, you know, we're right in the middle of Rapid City. So we have met with the city council, or the former city council, not the new one, has been briefed on everything. That's the other thing we've dealt with, is this project's about 10 years old. And so we've worked through several different tribal administrations at this point, and now we have a new mayor and we have a new city council here. And so working locally, we've had to work with Canyon Lake United Methodist Church because we will share access. The access to the site will be through their access point. And they've been amazing partners and great friends. And I'm proud to that we have a relationship with them, and give a lot of thanks to Pastor Deanne and Pastor Scott McCurdy, who have worked so closely with our project on being able to ensure that we have permanent access. But we've also had to work with the city. So we did do a courtesy review with the city and all local entities. And so we've visited with the school district, because the school district owns the access that Canyon Lake United Methodist Church is saying that they'll share with us is actually part of school property. And so they have an easement from the school. And so now we will be looking to get an easement with their easement for access to the site there. But I mean, I don't want to say we haven't met any resistance. I think we have met not knowing, people not knowing. And I mean, if our team was on and we count how many times that we've heard people say, I had no idea, we would be out of fingers and toes, because it's people just don't know. And it's not to the fault of an individual, but as a city, as a community, it was purposefully put to the side and kept quiet. And so, talking about this history, 60, 70 years later, after decisions were made, and we are all living through the decisions that were made at that time. It's a good time though, because I feel like we're at a point where people want to understand, they want to find ways that we can come together and not be divided. And that's what we've been working really hard on. So I guess there are challenges just because of how many people we've had to get support from and get permissions from. But they've all been great conversations. And I think that we've built some really good relationships here in the community, as well as with our tribal communities. And to the tribal communities, that means something, that we've worked with the city and the school, and that we're working through all these issues. And I think to the school and the city, it means something that we have the full support of the 3 tribes as well. So, but definitely the multi-jurisdictional conversation has been interesting. And there are some times when our consensus-based model does not work there, and we just got to get stuff done. And these are those situations where we've had to just press on and move forward. And very thankful for all of the, I not only the people that we're working with, but our colleagues and friends and people, trusted mentors in our community. I'm really grateful for people reaching out and trying to help me. People willing to lend an ear, when you just have to talk about the frustrations, and at no point are we ever feeling like, or am I ever feeling like we're giving up, but there's definitely times when you just want to pull your hair out. And I think as a community, I've had a lot of support, not just from the people I have to work with, but from people who care about this story, who have reached out and offered advice and offered, support as we work through all of these processes. But it's been a challenge, definitely. Eric Heikes, our landscape architect, always says, Amy's really good at herding cats. And he was like, and our herd of cats keeps getting bigger. And then he's like, Amy's a good cat herder. And I'm like, thank you. But it is a fun way of looking at it. And it really is people going in all different directions. And then to get something done, I'll try to pull everybody in, hey, we got to talk about this, and adding another layer. We've also had to work with BIA on the environmental assessment. And so nobody likes to work with the big bureaucratic agencies, but we've been extremely lucky to call Tim LaPointe, a partner and supporter of this project as well. And that's super meaningful. And it feels good to have the support. If you look at the different places that people are, the different positions they hold, all of these people have looked at this story, heard me talk, and said, this is a good thing. We need to make sure that this happens. And I think we're really lucky. I think the right people, again, just keep coming in at the right time, and we keep the momentum moving forward.
We have one comment in the chat that from Gabriel, and I think it's she, but there needs to be a forum that documents the experience of boarding school survivors and their descendants. Traumatized children became traumatized adults. Assimilation was meant to destroy First Nations for American expansion. The 2010 South Dakota statute of limitation must be changed. I guess it's so that survivors can bring claims against Christian and federal boarding schools. That was her comment. And I would also like to open it up to other people to ask questions or comments.
I just want to say that Gabrielle is absolutely right, though. We did pass a statute in 2010 that limits that put a statute of limitations on the times that you can bring complaints. And although this one was a BIE, so it wasn't a Christian school. And I think it's particular to Christian or to parochial, but
What's BIE?
Bureau of Indian Education. So it's a federal, a federal boarding school. There's federal, and then there was church related church. There's Catholic, and I think we had Episcopal here, but mostly Catholic. And that they're absolutely, one thing that Gabrielle brought up and that I'm seeing is it's a difficult conversation, and working with elders as part of this project. There are some who are just at the point where it just flows out of them, the trauma and the stories and what it has done to them, or what it has, how is it has affected their lives. And there's others who can't talk about it yet. And we've seen that. And it's hard to, as a younger person, or as the child or grandchild role that I am in with the elders, you feel almost helpless. You don't know what to do and how to support. And that's been something that I've worked, I'm really lucky to have elders that work with me. And I think that, I'm mentored and supported by Bev Warren and Kathy Labonte and Violet Catches, and even Karen Mortimer, and who is non-native, but the Unchis, I really value, I listen when they tell me what to do. And when I told them, I didn't know what to do when he was talking, and he was, it was emotional, and they were like, well, you just be quiet and you listen, and you don't need to write anything. You don't need to record anything. It's not for that. He was talking, he needed to say that to you. And I was like, okay. But it is hard. And I think that I'm a glass half full kind of person. And so I always think, for myself, I look at that trauma, and I'm really proud that, all four of my grandparents are in boarding schools. And my mom and dad made a conscious decision when they had children to break those cycles of not abuse, but like the way that kids were disciplined, and my dad was really harshly disciplined because that's how his dad learned, because his dad was in boarding school, and you mess up and you get swatted or you get hit, and so my parents made that decision to break that cycle with us. And so I was never hit in my life by my parents. I was chewed out, which is almost worse my mom is a fierce woman. And but when I look at that, so then that has affected me and my children. When I look at them, they are almost like free from that trauma because we've broken that cycle in my own family. And I know a lot of people, friends, colleagues my age who are in the same position, who are like, we're going to even, bring back healthy parenting, bring back healthy conversations between parents and children, and being able to communicate through difficult conversation or difficult events and things that happen. And so there's hope, right? Like, we are the hope. And I have great hope for my children. I think that my sons they see the world in a completely different way than I did. And I saw it differently than my parents. And there's strength in these stories now. They're able to hear these stories, and they don't feel the trauma or the sadness. They're like, what the heck? Why don't people know about this? Like, why don't we talk about this? That's messed up. Like they see the wrongdoing, and they're able to react from a place of, they know, they understand, know the issue. They have the background, but there's just not that same reaction. They don't carry the trauma that our parents did, our grandparents did, and that even we do to some extent, and I just have a lot of hope for this next generation. Our kids and grandkids are going to change the world.
Mm-hmm. I want to open it up one last time because we're going into the last quarter of this hour. Anyone have any comments, questions, complaints, anything? But it's interactive. So I know some people are interacting online. Some of are direct messaging, but to me. But if you have any comments or anything that you want to share, please just open up your mic and do that. Otherwise, you're welcome also to put it in the chat. Betty, you look like you're
Good
ready
morning.
to go.
I wasn't going to because I just want to say to Amy and everyone else, this work is extremely important. I don't even need to elaborate. I can't do it, but it's extremely important to breaking the cycle of trauma. Thank you so much.
Anyone else? Okay. Can you talk, I'll sort of like take off where Betty left off. Can you talk about this trauma some more? Can you talk about the healing that needs to be done within the community and it's the connection to that, to what you're trying to do?
Yeah, and I'm going to start with a story. In looking for these graves, we found documents saying that children had been buried at Mount View Cemetery, and there was one grave there that was all of the graves are on small, if you look at our website, you'll see they're on small, like almost bricks that were just it looks like cement, and then somebody just carved in a name. And one of them said Mabel Holy. And when we found that one, I think Heather actually put it on social media and just said, we're looking for the family of Mabel Holy. And Violet Catches, who's from Cheyenne River, who lives in Pierre and is working at the Pierre Indian Learning Center, responded and said, that's my mother. And so when we started talking, or she started talking, it wasn't her mother. Her mother was named after her. It was her mother's great aunt or grandmother, as we would say. And so, or no, it was her mom's sister. It was her aunt. And so, and we were just like mind blown, that we actually found a descendant, found this person, this living person. But in Violet becoming involved with the project, she said, my mom spent her entire life looking for her. There's Mabel and there's Julia, and they were both taken to school and neither of them came back. And we don't know where they're at. And you think about that as trauma, that not knowing as trauma. Like, can you imagine living your whole life and like not knowing? And so I think that for me, just thinking about that, and that the trauma of not knowing, and the fact that we might not ever know everything about these schools and the children that attended, we might not find all of the children at all of the schools in the United States and in Canada. But Mabel brought Violet to us, and Violet has been involved with the project ever since. But Violet, we helped the family fundraise for an actual tombstone for her because they had these little stone slabs that were just in the ground at Mount View Cemetery that gave no indication or honor to the person that she was. And Mabel Holy was I think she was a stepdaughter of Touch the Cloud, and she actually survived the Wounded Knee Massacre. And can you imagine surviving the Wounded Knee Massacre to then die at a boarding school? Like, and how do you even attempt to say you're going to heal that kind of trauma for a family, for a community, for a whole people? And that's the task that we have. And so you think about it, so monumental. Sometimes I'm like, it's so big. Like, how are we ever going to do this? Or how are we ever going to have the impact that we hope to have? And I'm not the one to say, how that's going to look, but I do know that we can build this site. We can name those children. We can put their names out. We can create places, a place for them to be acknowledged, a place for them to be honored and remembered. And the way we do that is the incorporation of Indigenous people in the process of creating this place. And that is one thing that there were some things that were in the works that I had to kind of back up when I started, because I was like, we need to make sure, a lot of things happened when we had no money. And so we were trying to make things happen. We're trying to write grants, or try to get things to happen. But now that we do have the funds, so we do have $2 million from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and that is for construction, 100% construction. It's literally like a construction contractor, the architect, it's all construction. what I've been doing is fundraising around the elements that I think are going to be part of that healing. So we are, I put together an art commission. So we have 4 Indigenous artists who are working with us. I'm so lucky to have Marty Tubles Jr., Lynn Cooney, Ray Janice, and Daryl Nohart working with me. And at first I asked them to join the project and to help me select the art components, the artistic components that were going to be put on site. We had some interpretive elements that I wanted help selecting. I didn't want to be the one to select. And I wanted it to be as inclusive of a process as possible. And so we put together the art commission, and in working with those 4, there was some criteria that we put out for the art commission. We're looking for local artists. We're looking for people who live in the area. We're looking for descendants of boarding school survivors, particularly to this school. And Lynn Cooney, who's part of our project or part of that art commission, had an ancestor that died at the school. We're looking for boarding school survivors themselves. And Daryl Nohart is a boarding school survivor. And I mean, we just thought this criteria would add to that feeling of like, who's to say what healing looks like, and how, what does that look like? And how do we do that? How do we build this into this site? How do we make sure that every element on site is telling this story, a part of this story, a piece of this story that means something to somebody? And that's how we do it. It's the inclusion of our own people. It's the inclusion of artists, and it's the inclusion of elders and people who are descendants of people like Violet Catches, who are part of these families that carried that trauma, that not knowing for 100 years. Mabel died in 1901. Can you imagine that family for 120 years had no idea where their relative was? And we were able to find her and bring that piece together. That to me was just one indication, one way that healing can happen here. And
that, well, I was gonna say, that story really points up another angle of trauma, and that is if someone sent their kid, or their kid was taken to a boarding school and disappeared, that becomes like a community trauma, because people are still coming to take your children. And you got to imagine, like, oh, my child could go into oblivion and I never see them again. That has to be really traumatic, especially when you can't think of anything you can do to keep people from taking your child.
You bring up a point that I'm really, really proud of. And so part of this healing is reclamation. And I'm I'm active with the parent advisory committee with Indian Ed here in Rapid City. I ran for school board. And what that was really about for me and for the women that I've been lucky enough to work with is this reclamation of voice, this reclamation of the role of a mother, and being able to have a say in what the education of your child looks like. And I want to give a little shout out here to Tatewi Means and Valeria Big Eagle, who are 2 good friends of mine and women who have joined me in that reclamation of a voice and taking back this idea that we have a say in what happens to our children. And maybe our parents and grandparents didn't ever have, weren't comfortable with that. And our grandparents had that taken from them. Our great grandparents, can you imagine having your children taken, but also having no idea, no say in what they were fed, how they were treated, what they learned? They had no say in any of that. And so we are super proud to take that back, and to be active and involved and to have a say and let it be heard, what we want, our expectations for our children, and not being, and being proud that our expectations for our children are great. They're grand. And but it should be like that for all children, all families, but our people in particular have that right taken from them, literally stripped from them. And so there's ways that I see this work awakening that in a lot of us, this idea of reclamation, this idea of belonging, and the idea that our voices are important. So I think that that is also, another way that we attribute healing to the work that we're doing and saying that it might not happen today or tomorrow, or it might not happen in a year, but the work that we're doing is generational. And if we can set a foundation that is strong and we can make a plan for this place that includes the voices of community and that, I mean, we're on track for healing and we can do this. And it's going to be baby steps, big steps sometimes, but the group that I'm working with is so committed to this work. And again, acknowledging Heather Dawn Thompson and Eric Zimmer and KB Brown and all of the people who have worked with us on this project and really set that foundation and started this work. You know, there's, how do you, I mean, we always talk about Pandora's box, you know, and here we are, you know, I was involved about 6 years ago. I would never have imagined in 6 years that I would not be working for an organization, that I would be out here doing this job, just learning this stuff on my own, trying to figure it out and get it done and pulling together the people that I could to get this to happen, you know, but here we are. And for me, I know that it has been part of my own healing for my family and for myself. And I'm really proud of that. And I have high hopes for the site and for the people that I'm working with to create the site, but also for those who are going to come visit it and the place that it's going to be for our community. I think that there's just so much hope. And
Yes.
and then with something, an issue like boarding schools, you have to find that hope and you have to keep that as the focus to be able to make it through all the conversations and the things that you read and see that are so traumatizing still.
I want to invite everyone to download the chat that, you know, there's 3 little buttons down at the bottom, 3 little dots. You click on that, and then from that, you can download that to your computer. And I mention that because there are some good links to that. And to follow this project, go to the link that's right on the top of this chat, which is the link to the Remembering the Children project. I hope that this is getting into some kind of pathway for us to all put some wind in your sails, Amy, and in the project, in the sails of the project. Before we close, are there any other things that we got a couple minutes, but are there any things that you want to pass on to folks?
Are you asking me or the
I'm asking Amy.
No, I mean, I see Carrie had some questions in here. I'm gonna put my email in. And
Sure.
I don't know of anything happening with Canton right now, but I do know that you know, Red Cloud is working on similar work and has done GPR there. And I've been working with the Sioux Youth Council, who brought those 9 children back from Carlisle. And we've been in discussions about ways that we create a coalition out of this. And there's the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. We would love to have an Ocheti Shakowee or a Great Plains Boarding School Healing Coalition, because there are multiple sites, multiple schools. And if we could all lend our capacity and what we've learned to others to help start projects in their own community, we would love to do that. I think our site has been heavy on the research side. Red Cloud has actually done GPR, so they have that knowledge. And then the Sioux Youth Council and Rosebud has the repatriation, like they've actually done work through NAGPRA. And so as we learn, we are definitely willing and wanting to share with others what we've learned in ways that they can do that in their own communities.
Great. Thanks a whole bunch, Amy. Amy is the executive director of the Remembering the Children's project. Rememberingthechildren.org is the website. As I mentioned before, you can download the chat and get a lot of links to issues and places where you can learn more about this, which I think all of us would do well to do, because if our brothers and sisters are in pain, we should be sharing that pain, and we should be there to support them, and also because it's supporting us. You know, we're all in this together. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. That brings to conclusion our program today. We hope you'll join us next week, which we'll be talking about the SuperCon. Okay.
Thank
See you
you.
next week. Okay, bye-bye.